What up, it's your boy Dick Incredible, and this is my discussion slash review for Found Episode 6, titled Missing While Addicted. And this time, Gabby, it's on you. Let's talk about it.
Headed out for change, I just started on my quest. Yeah, the world will know my name, I'm excited, I'm obsessed. No one in my way but myself and a test. Yeah, I will be the best, yeah, I will be the best. Life is just a game, I'll be playing till I rest. I'll be there to claim my own spot among the best.
Great episode, but this time, I don't agree with Gabby. Well, at least not 100% anyway. Maybe like 60-40, maybe 70-30, somewhere around in there anyway. But I totally understand it coming from her perspective. Now, this episode we see that this lady hires them. I want to say her name was Rachel. I think that was her name. She hires the team to find her missing son because she is on the verge of dying and she wants to, just spend her last moments with her son. And that's totally understandable. Now, she didn't tell them what was wrong with her son or anything and why he was missing, but she just told him that he was missing, and she didn't want the police involved because her son was a drug addict. And we dive into the story this episode about her son being a drug addict and trying to figure out more and how he's missing. And we learn that he's a drug addict because his sister died, he found a body, and that kind of messed him up a little bit. And while unfolding that, there's so much going on with this episode. While that's unfolding, we find out that he was staying at the sober living house, and the guy that's running the sober living house says only 10 people is living there, but in all actuality, like on paper, it's like 50 to 60 people because he's committing fraud and taking the money from the insurance companies. Oh my gosh! And then when they confronted the guy, he was like, "Well, that's not a crime, is it, bruh? You're stealing from insurance companies. That's fraud, okay?" Oh my gosh, how you a criminal, but you a dumb criminal? You know what I'm saying? But they caught him, and dude was not actually tied to the overall concept of the case. He was just committing crimes on his own, which was crazy. But we see that the team is looking for David, but this is also messing with Gabby a little bit because Gabby's now all in her feelings, and we see in the flashback it's starting to snow and it's winter, and she wanted to be there for her dad, but Sir wouldn't let her. Sir was trying to convince her that he's the only one that's been there for her. He's the only one that's going to be there for her. Her dad never really cared for her, and she shouldn't have to take care of her dad. Her dad should have to take care of her. Valid statement, but at the same time, hey, it is what it is, man. Grief is different for everybody, but it's hard to say when you got a child involved. I mean, I get you grieving and losing your spouse would mess with you, but when you have a child involved, you know what I'm saying? At that point, I don't want to say you put your grief on the back burner, but your child becomes your top priority and your grief becomes second. I mean, either way, it's not totally healthy, but that didn't happen in her father's case. Her father kind of was dealing with the grief of losing his spouse and his wife and her mother, and that kind of consumed his life. And then Gabby ended up being taken. That messed him up a little bit more. And we learned as the episode progressed, he got addicted to alcohol. And by the time he decided to get treatment or get help, it was a little bit too late. And Gabby never got to say her actual final goodbye to her father. And that was just eating up on the inside of her. And, there's anger towards that. There's anger towards Sir. There's a lot of emotions going on. There's anger towards this case because Don didn't want to take the case in the first place because it revolves around addiction. And we learned his story going back in the back end of this episode, but we'll discuss that later. But Don decided he didn't really want to take the case anyway, but hey, he always has Gabby's back. So he took it, he put his little 2 cents in, but he took the case anyway. And we see throughout the overall concept of this episode is that Gabby's dealing with all of her emotions while trying to get Sir to help her at the same time, trying to deal with the emotions of the dying mother, wanting to see her son and reminiscing of how it's affecting her at the same time. There's so many moving pieces when it came to this episode with Gabby especially. And like I said, going forward, we knew that Gabby was going to get the spotlight more than anybody else, but that doesn't mean that they shun some of the other characters because everybody gets a little bit of limelight when it comes to this show. And that's one thing I love about it. Now, we see that Gabby's dealing with all this, and she decided to continue to take the case even after they were fired. And one thing for me is learning about this case. Something didn't click for me very early on in the episode, and when we see the video footage, because the dude's file was redacted, and as we learn, there was a CI involved in the whole drug escapade part of this episode, because David was a drug user. There was a CI involved, so the case was redacted because they didn't want the CI's name to be spilled. But the CI was someone that cared for David, so she was willing to give them information, which led to the arrest of the sober living guy. But we see all of this messing with GABI, and it leads to her doing stuff that she would never normally do. They normally skirt the lines of the law. They never really fully break it. You know what I'm saying? There's a big difference in skirting the outside lines of the law and then fully breaking those lines. You know what I'm saying? That's what she done this episode, because it was heavily tied to her own emotions and her own feelings. And with the flashback, you could heavily see that as well. And boy, they went real out. Like this is the outside line of the law. This is where they were at. Like, you can't even see it. You can't see it. This is where they were at this episode. And everybody was trying to warn GABI, but she was so cold, man. She wouldn't study none of them. If you guys don't want to do it, I'll do it by myself, because it just related to her. And plus, she's also dealing with some other stuff as well, because we see this episode from, I want to say the kid's name was Tony, from episode 4. GABI is sitting with him almost every day before his father comes. You know what I'm saying? Like all throughout the night, and she and maybe like midway through the morning before his father comes, she's sitting there with this kid. And I give props to them for that. Big ups to GABI, because in most shows, next thing you know, the kid would have been totally fine. He's out of the coma, but they're really sticking to it, man. You know what I'm saying? We didn't see all of that last episode because she was busy, but we see it this episode, and they're keeping the kid in a coma, and I'm really loving that aspect about this show, man, because it's giving us something just a little bit different. And long story short, we solved the case, but I knew going forward, when we got the evidence of the video and the cousin was like, he was grabbing the kid's shoulder, I was like, you know what, man, he is definitely involved somehow. I don't know how, but he's definitely involved. And we see that he's involved because he pushed this girl off the ladder and doped up his cousin, kidnapped his cousin. Like, where did you see this going? To be fair, you got away with it for, I'd say roughly maybe like 17, 16 years. I don't know how old they are, but you got away with it for a long time. At this point, it's best to just confess. And we see this episode as well, that the case kind of wrapped up very early on in the episode. I say we probably had maybe like at least 15 to 20 minutes left before the episode actually ended and the case was wrapped up. And that dove into some other stuff, man. We see GABI and Lacey kind of having some conflict, because Lacey kind of came out and told GABI she can see the difference in them now. They're not as close as they used to be. And she told GABI that she knows that she lied to her about something. She don't know what, but she knows that she lied to her. And we see that Don is still opening up to Zeke about, him being a little bit lonely, but he also opened up this episode about the guy named Mike that he used when they were at the sober living house undercover, that it was his friend while he was in the army, and the guy was using, and then something happened while they were in the army, which probably led to Dunn possibly being kidnapped, probably. And that's really eating at him, man. And I love how every week, I know we're going to get GABI stuff, but we dive into just a little bit more of everybody else. We see Trent was at odds with GABI this episode. They were both like on opposite sides of the coin, man. They wasn't feeling it at all. But we see at the ending of the episode, it came out that GABI had the thumb drive, and Trent took the fall for it, because we see them growing a little bit closer, and I did not expect her to invite him in. Her inviting Trent in, that was a shock to me. But I wonder how that's going to play out now, because you can't get too loud, and then we don't know how Sarah's going to act. But Trent took the fall for her, and now he's on suspension, and the possibility of being fired, more than likely. And GABI felt some type of way, so that's why she let him in. But oh my gosh, man, it's getting crazy, bro. This is 6 episodes, and we're getting all this information. We're getting fed all this wonderful information. But we also see that Margaret is dealing with something. She's getting a bunch of random phone calls, and we find out they're psychiatrists, and she's talking to the psychiatrist about, because she got her hopes up and everything, and we see she's walking around with the poster of her son in the bag, and she was putting it up against the wall like, well, welcome home. So we could tell that now Margaret is kind of delving a little bit deeper in herself, and because of the hope, it's messing with her just a little bit. And this episode was great, man, and I love the fact that, like I said, the case was solved very early on. We had like 20 minutes left in the episode, and we see that everybody is making these connections, but at the same time, the core group is starting to fall apart, in my opinion, just a little bit, because now GABI has so much other stuff going on and something that she's hiding that she's not really sharing with the team, and that's really starting to mess with the cohesive unit as a whole. But I'm telling you, that episode was great though, man. I really loved it, and I just can't wait for episode 7. It's your boy Dick Incredible. Don't forget to smash the like button till you can't smash any more. Comment down below, and I'll be sure to respond to each and every one of them and subscribe. Peace out.
Cause I've been working a lot, I think I deserve a shot, I think I deserve a spot. Cause it's been years on this path that I walked, and if I keep going, I pray I'll be at the top.